Iraq is a country located in the Middle East. It sits on a piece of land that is ancient and historically significant, often called the cradle of civilization. Its neighbors include Iran to the east, Saudi Arabia to the south, Kuwait to the south, Syria to the west, Jordan to the west. The nation possesses vast reserves of oil, which has made it a country of great strategic importance for global powers for over a century. Control over or influence in Iraq means having a say in the world's energy supply. This simple fact has often placed Iraq at the center of international politics and conflict, drawing the attention of nations far from its borders, including the United States. The relationship between the United States and Iraq was not always one of direct conflict. For many years, the two countries navigated a complicated diplomatic path. Following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, the foreign policy of the United States underwent a dramatic shift. The administration of President George W. Bush adopted a more assertive and preemptive stance against perceived threats. Iraq, under the rule of its longtime dictator Saddam Hussein, was identified as a primary concern. Before the 2003 invasion, Iraq was under the firm and brutal control of Saddam Hussein. He had ruled the country since 1979 as a dictator, leading the Ba'ath Party. His regime was known for its extreme repression, using secret police, torture, and mass executions to eliminate any opposition. He had also led Iraq into two major wars, the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988 and the invasion of Kuwait in 1990. The second of these actions led directly to the first major military confrontation with the United States, the 1991 Gulf War. That war successfully pushed the Iraqi army out of Kuwait but left Saddam Hussein in power. Following the Gulf War, the United Nations imposed strict sanctions on Iraq. These sanctions were intended to pressure the regime and, most importantly, to ensure that it dismantled its weapons programs, including chemical, biological, and nuclear capabilities. UN weapons inspectors were sent into the country to verify compliance, but the process was fraught with difficulties. The Iraqi regime frequently obstructed the inspectors' work, leading to a cat-and-mouse game that fueled international suspicion. The political climate in the United States was also a crucial factor. For years, a group of influential policymakers and thinkers in Washington had advocated for regime change in Iraq. These arguments gained significant traction after the September 11 attacks. Although there was no credible evidence linking Saddam Hussein to the 9/11 plot, the attacks created an environment of heightened fear and a new willingness to use military force preemptively. The administration of President George W. Bush presented several key justifications for launching a war against Iraq. The primary and most urgent reason was the claim that Saddam possessed weapons of mass destruction, or WMD, chemical agents like sarin, mustard gas, biological weapons like anthrax, an active program to develop nuclear weapons. We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. A second major justification was an alleged link between Saddam's government and international terrorist groups, specifically Al-Qaeda. Senior U.S. officials, including Vice President Dick Cheney, repeatedly suggested there were connections. They tied Iraq to the network responsible for the 9/11 attacks. This was meant to connect the Iraq War to the broader war on terror in Afghanistan. Despite assertions, intelligence agencies, including the CIA, found no evidence of a collaborative relationship. The 9/11 Commission later concluded there was no credible evidence of such a link. These justifications were presented forcefully on the world stage, most notably in Colin Powell's February 2003 UN presentation. Powell presented satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and reports from human sources as evidence. Much of the intelligence it relied on would later be proven flawed, inaccurate, or exaggerated. The failure to find WMD stockpiles after the invasion severely damaged U.S. credibility. The war began on March 20, 2003, with an aerial assault on Baghdad. The opening phase of the invasion was famously dubbed shock and awe. The strategy was to use overwhelming military force to swiftly dismantle the Iraqi regime's ability to command and resist. The initial strikes aimed to decapitate the government by targeting locations where Saddam Hussein and senior leaders were believed to be hiding. For nights, the skies over Baghdad were lit up by explosions from cruise missiles and precision-guided bombs launched from U.S. warships in the Persian Gulf and from stealth bombers flying from distant bases. Following the initial air campaign, ground forces from the United States, the United Kingdom, and a coalition of other countries began their advance. The main thrust came from the south, with U.S. Army and Marine Corps units pushing north from Kuwait. The coalition forces advanced rapidly across the desert, bypassing some cities to maintain momentum toward the ultimate prize, Baghdad. They faced resistance from pockets of the Iraqi army and irregular forces known as the Fedayeen Saddam. One early challenge was securing the southern oil fields around Basra. There were fears Saddam's forces would set oil wells on fire, as they had done in Kuwait in 1991, creating an environmental and economic disaster. While the oil fields were captured largely intact, the fight for cities like Basra and Nasiriyah proved tougher than expected. In Nasiriyah, a U.S. Army convoy took a wrong turn and was ambushed, resulting in the deaths of several soldiers and the capture of others, including Private Jessica Lynch. By the beginning of April, less than 3 weeks after the invasion began, U.S. forces had reached the outskirts of Baghdad. They had covered hundreds of miles of hostile territory in a very short time, a testament to their training and equipment and the strategy of rapid, decisive operations. The battle for Baghdad began in early April 2003. Rather than engaging in a prolonged and bloody street-by-street fight, U.S. commanders opted for a series of rapid, armored incursions into the heart of the city, which they called Thunder Runs. On April 5th, and then more decisively on April 7th, columns of M1 Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles blasted their way through the city's defenses, seizing key government buildings, palaces, and the international airport. These armored thrusts demonstrated to the remaining Iraqi defenders and the city's population that the regime had lost control. The symbolic climax of the invasion occurred on April 9, 2003. On that day, U.S. Marines helped a crowd of Iraqis in Firdos Square pull down a large statue of Saddam Hussein. The event was broadcast live around the world and became the defining image of the fall of the regime. For many, it signaled liberation and the end of a long nightmare under a brutal dictator. However, the collapse of state authority also created a power vacuum. As the statue fell, widespread looting broke out across Baghdad. Government ministries, museums, and hospitals were ransacked, with citizens and organized groups carrying away everything from furniture to priceless historical artifacts from the National Museum of Iraq. On May 1, 2003, President George W. Bush, speaking from the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, declared the end of major combat operations. Standing under a large banner that read, "Mission Accomplished," he announced that the United States and its allies had prevailed in the initial phase of the war. Following the fall of his regime in April 2003, Saddam Hussein vanished. He became the most wanted man in Iraq, designated as high-value target number 1 by the coalition forces. The United States military issued a deck of playing cards featuring the faces of the most wanted members of the former regime, with Saddam as the ace of spades. For months, a massive manhunt, codenamed Operation Red Dawn, was underway to find him. United States forces conducted numerous raids and gathered intelligence from captured Ba'athist officials, slowly closing the net around the former dictator. The breakthrough came in December 2003. After interrogating individuals from his inner circle, United States forces were led to a farm in the town of Ad-Dawar, just south of Tikrit. On the evening of December 13th, soldiers from the United States Army's 4th Infantry Division cordoned off the area. Their search led them to a small camouflaged hole in the ground, what was described as a spider hole. Hidden inside this cramped underground bunker was Saddam Hussein. He was disheveled with a long beard and matted hair and offered no resistance when captured. He was found with a pistol, but he did not use it. The news of Saddam's capture was announced to the world the next day by L. Paul Bremer, the head of the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq. At a press conference in Baghdad, Bremer famously declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got him." Saddam Hussein remained in United States custody for years. He was eventually handed over to the new Iraqi government to stand trial for crimes committed during his rule. The trial, conducted by the Iraqi Special Tribunal, focused on the 1982 massacre of 148 Shia men and boys in the town of Dujail. In November 2006, he was found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death. On December 30, 2006, Saddam Hussein was executed by hanging, bringing a final definitive end to his long and violent reign over Iraq. After the fall of Baghdad, the United States and its coalition partners established the Coalition Provisional Authority, or CPA, to govern Iraq. Led by American diplomat L. Paul Bremer, the CPA made two fateful decisions in May 2003. Order number 1, Debathification. banning high-ranking Ba'ath members from government. Order number 2, the formal dissolution of the Iraqi military, security, and intelligence services. These orders dismantled the state's administrative and security structures overnight, leaving hundreds of thousands of trained and armed men unemployed and resentful. Instead of peaceful reconstruction, a rapid, multifaceted insurgency rose. This war was not against a conventional army. It included former members of Saddam's regime, Sunni Ba'athists, Iraqi nationalists opposing the occupation, foreign jihadists and extremist groups tied to al-Qaeda, and leaders like Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. These groups used guerrilla tactics, roadside bombs, suicide attacks, kidnappings to target coalition forces, Iraqi security personnel, and civilians, plunging the country into chaos. Violence escalated into major battles in Fallujah, Ramadi, in Anbar province. In 2004, U.S. Marines fought 2 major battles for control of Fallujah. Fallujah had become an insurgent stronghold. These were among the most intense urban fights for U.S. forces since Vietnam. In February 2006, extremists bombed the Al-Askari Mosque in Samarra, a key Shia shrine. That provocation unleashed sectarian retaliatory violence between Sunni and Shia militias, pushing Iraq toward civil war and causing thousands of civilian deaths monthly. In response, the U.S. launched the 2007 surge. President Bush ordered 20,000 plus additional troops to secure Baghdad and Anbar. General David Petraeus led a strategy combining more troops with new counterinsurgency tactics. Soldiers moved off big bases into smaller combat outposts inside communities to protect civilians and cooperate with local leaders. The surge, plus the Sunni tribal Anbar awakening, cut violence significantly by 2008, but Iraq remained fragile and deeply divided. The Iraq War had a devastating impact on the Iraqi people. Estimates vary, but hundreds of thousands of civilians died. Many died from direct violence. Infrastructure failed, healthcare collapsed, sanitation broke down, millions were forced from their homes, internally displaced persons, refugees in neighboring countries, Syria, Jordan. The war shattered the country's social fabric. Sectarian divisions deepened, Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, tensions with the Kurdish population. Daily life became violence, fear, uncertainty, car bombs, kidnappings, militia rule. For the United States military, the war was long and costly. U.S. troops withdrew in December 2011. More than 4,400 American service members were killed. Over 32,000 were wounded. Many returned with PTSD and other invisible wounds. The financial cost ran into the trillions. The war strained the U.S. military, especially the Army and the Marine Corps. Forces were stretched by repeated deployments. Iraq, Afghanistan. The war altered the Middle East's geopolitics. Saddam Hussein was removed. He was a Sunni Arab leader and a rival of Iran. His removal removed a check on Iranian influence. Iraq's Shia majority gained power. Baghdad grew closer to Tehran. Iran's position strengthened. Regional rivals were alarmed. Saudi Arabia. The shift fueled competition and proxy conflicts between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It reshaped Syria. It reshaped Yemen. It reshaped Lebanon. That instability had another dangerous consequence. The power vacuum and sectarian chaos created fertile ground for extremist groups. Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The group once led by al-Zarqawi, a precursor to ISIS. ISIS capitalized on the Syrian civil war. It seized large territories in Iraq. It seized large territories in Syria. It declared a self-proclaimed caliphate. The Iraq War, which began with a swift invasion in 2003, evolved into one of the most complex and controversial conflicts in modern American history. Launched on the basis of flawed intelligence about weapons of mass destruction and supposed links to terrorism, the war succeeded in its initial goal of removing Saddam Hussein from power. The toppling of his statue in Baghdad seemed to promise a new era of freedom for the Iraqi people. However, this early victory quickly gave way to violence. A brutal insurgency emerged, and a sectarian civil war tore communities apart. The long-term consequences have been deep and far-reaching. For Iraq, the war brought an end to a brutal dictatorship, but at the cost of immense human suffering, the destruction of its infrastructure, and the fracturing of its society along sectarian lines. For the United States, the war came at a tremendous cost in lives and treasure. It damaged America's international credibility, strained key alliances, and led to a prolonged and divisive debate at home about the use of military force. The war also reshaped the Middle East in ways that are still unfolding today. The removal of Saddam Hussein upended the regional balance of power, empowering Iran and intensifying the rivalry between Tehran and Sunni Arab states led by Saudi Arabia. The chaos of the post-invasion years created the conditions for the rise of ISIS, a threat that destabilized the entire region and drew the United States back into military conflict in Iraq. The war's legacy is therefore one of unintended consequences, where the solution to one problem created a host of new and more complex challenges. Ultimately, the story of the Iraq War serves as a cautionary tale. It highlights the dangers of acting on uncertain intelligence, the immense difficulty of nation-building through foreign military intervention, and the unpredictable nature of conflict in a deeply complex region. More than 2 decades after the invasion began, the war's shadow continues to influence American foreign policy, military strategy, and the lives of millions of people in the Middle East. Its key events, from the shock and awe campaign to the long and painful insurgency, offer critical lessons about the limits of power and the profound responsibility that comes with the decision to go to war.